Hi, Louise.
Hi, Sarah.
Here we are. We are on the penultimate chapter of The Primal Wound by Nancy Verrier. This is chapter 15 called Further Implications of the Primal Wound, the Impact of Abandonment on Other Populations. It's funny timing because I was just talking to one of my closest friends, and she said, I so relate to all the abandonment feelings, even though I wasn't adopted. And basically she was child number 4 maybe for her mom, or
Mm-hmm.
3 and out of 5, and she was handed off to a nanny. And
Oh,
so
yes.
and she spent her whole life like seeking her mother's love and approval and all that stuff. So yes, other people do
Yes.
have abandonment issues as well. So
I like that we're doing this chapter because throughout this whole podcast, you and I have been hearing from friends and different people, guests, listeners who are like, well, like we've had very good friends write us, I wasn't adopted, but I went through the divorce with my parents and I've related so much to your thing. And I'm like, I'm glad that she's following up with this chapter because, and she also gets into bigger things too. I mean, as we're going to touch on in here, but here's one quote here she has at the beginning. Although this book has been written for and about members of the adoption triad, it has implications for people other than those involved with adoption. Boom. And she goes into it,
yeah, and she lists all
lists them all. And I thought there was one thing she talked about with the with babies that people go through with premature babies that are in
when they're
incubators.
incubators. Yeah.
And I've had friends and relatives that have had this, and I didn't even think about that myself, honestly, that would be the sort of similar situation.
I think I did, just because I got into a conversation with someone early on in our podcast about this and about
Oh,
surrogates, which she talks about.
yes.
I guess the thing though that remains for adopted people is that if you're kids getting out of an incubator or kids who have nannies, they're still with their
Parent.
DNA who mirror them,
Yes.
and so there is that difference, I guess.
And when you talked about the surrogate situation, she was more in favor of, and what I like about Nancy Berry, just to go back on that, is she's very like, I am a professional in this field and I am a parent of an adopted child. And I do feel strongly about these certain things, which I like about her. She gives her opinion as a doctor
Mm-hmm.
and not just like a layman's opinion about certain situations. And it's not to cover all, but that if anyone wants to read this book, it's excellent in that way. She gets into how she thought in vitro was better if people could do it because of the mom being more with the genetics of the baby
And carrying the baby.
and carrying the
Because
baby.
when she talked about the surrogacy, that was something that came up.
Mm-hmm.
Was people ask, or she's thought about, is it the DNA connection or is it the carrying of the child that causes the primal wound? And initially it's the separation of the child, because you can have a shared DNA with your father and not have those same issues.
Yes.
Be separated. One thing I thought was interesting that is talking about babies who grow up in daycares, like they're shortly after they're born being put in daycare, and
long hour daycares.
Yeah. And, I'm sure this was controversial when it came out. And I remember saying to somebody, I think Becker was in middle school, and I just said, well, I kind of made a choice that I was going to put him first. And so blah, blah, blah. And I could tell that my friend was offended because she's like, well, I need it. I had to have a career, and, it can be a really touchy topic.
Well, I mean, this is the struggle for women, right? Because women, she does say, which this is interesting too. Fathers are so important. So in no way are we ever diminishing the father. I mean, we both know how important fathers are. And she says fathers are super important for the baby, but the first few months and maybe years of life, the mother is the important, primary person for this baby. And so she does say, this is the whole thing with mothers. It is the biggest dilemma of the world. can you work and can you put your kids in daycare? Can you have a nanny, or leave for long time periods to do something that you work on and come back and the baby's, left with other people? And she said that she has no judgment. This is just a reality with
Yeah.
babies have to be with their mothers to not have some issues. And she did say that what I did like is she said people have to make choices and there's financial choices, but the one thing that we could do and learn from is talking to our kids.
Right. That's what I had. Children need to be able to talk about their feelings so that the feelings don't become bigger than life or repressed.
Yes. And that she said, save yourself thousands of dollars later in therapy by talking early with your children, which is true.
Yeah.
That could be with adoptees as well. It'd be really nice to have these discussions.
Yeah, because it says if a mother is not available, it will bring up feelings for the child, feelings that the mother will have to be prepared to acknowledge and validate.
Yeah. I like when you and I had on Casey, one of our guests, and he's a newly adopted father. I like that he's having these conversations already with his little boy already. Just the conversation and hearing how he, from the adopted community, talking to us, and he's on adoptee Twitter. He wants to learn how to say things correctly and talk to his child. That's where things in the adoption world can change, and with all parenting, right? I mean, she's a really pro. She has this thing about herself in here. I underlined it where I thought was interesting about Nancy. Hold on. Well, I'm not finding it, but where she was talking about herself. Like if she didn't have the help and her daughter didn't have the help, she would end up being this, it was the mean stepmother role, like the wicked stepmother. She said a lot of adopted mothers related to her while she was writing this book, that they felt like they were the mean stepmother. They could never do anything right. And all they wanted to do was love this child. And she gets into the role of step parents and how step parents think, why don't they love me? I'm trying so hard. And it really is just the basic thing that a little child is wanting their mom.
Yeah.
And she said she would have become that wicked stepmother, and her daughter would have become the hater of the wicked stepmother had they not had therapy.
Yes. And the realization, the knowledge.
Yeah.
Awareness. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So she's not sitting on her high ivory tower. She's saying, I was in this too. We're all community in this, What else hit you in this? I mean, there's
a lot. I thought it was interesting about the whole conversation about fetal alcohol syndrome and how once that was discovered, how a lot of adoptive parents were like, well, maybe that's what's wrong with my child. And even if they didn't have that information,
they didn't have the information, but they started putting the character
looking for something to blame, without acknowledging that it's actually the primal wound. Yes, there have been fetal alcohol, but it's not the only.
No, and you can assign. So when I was looking, because of this, I Googled really quick, what are the symptoms of fetal alcohol syndrome? And it is a lot of things that just adoptees have. And I'm thinking, that is convenient when that came out, because it came out sort of right after the baby scoop era, when all that research came out. So then everyone's like, that's, what, my kid would have been great, but they definitely probably had that.
Yes.
The mother had to be a drinker. It's like, how many?
So it's a way to deflect from what the real truth may be, which is it's a wound from separation.
Yeah.
And it had, acknowledge that.
Yeah.
The other thing, just because of the timing of the Supreme Court and what's going on, is the whole abortion thing. And, it isn't taking away abortion isn't going to, what am I trying to say? Fill in the blanks for me, Louise.
I know what you're trying to. Well, when she gets into this whole, she has 2 pages on abortion because this is a hot topic. And adoption, as we found out through people that are on the Supreme Court, think, well, you don't have to have an abortion because you can just put the baby up for adoption.
Yeah.
So cavalier that they're hand in hand, but they're not hand in hand. These are separate issues. And I think that's what she wanted to say is, she's not pro-abortion she didn't get into that. She was just saying, listen, abortion is for a woman to choose with a woman, with herself. And adoption is the same way. You just because someone didn't have an abortion, are they going to go put their baby up for adoption? This isn't.
Well, and statistically, that's actually not true.
No, right.
That if someone doesn't have abortion, it's more likely that they're going to raise the baby. If they don't have, raise the baby themselves, it's a whole separate thing. Yeah.
It's so
the person on the Supreme Court was woefully
ill-informed,
misguided in saying that when she's an adoptive parent. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
Well, everyone takes it. I've had, so my biological mom chose to put me up for adoption, and abortion was legal in Colorado in Boulder County.
In that year it was?
Yes. In 1968 in Boulder. And people ask me all the time, oh, well, and I'm like, I don't know that ever was Linda. We don't know that. I don't know Linda. She passed away. And I do know her background religiously. And I don't think abortion was a question for her. And I don't think it's not a hand in hand thing. And it just drives me crazy because I've had people say to me in my lifetime, oh, you're so lucky you could have been an abortion. I'm like, well, that's, first of all, lovely to say to me. And second of all, this isn't like, you can take my thing and try to fit your life or facts that you need on this subject. But that's what she was trying to say. Like, let's not use what's happening with adoption to make the case for or against abortion. These are separate issues. And I think it
is. And it's interesting because it just made me think, I think adoptees we're having our Me Too moment, for the first time.
Hashtag Me Too adoptees.
But because it's really, really, there's a lot of stuff going on around this topic right now. And
there just is, Sarah. When we were on Twitter, you and I see the same feeds. There was someone who posted something today and said, listen, if the adoptees like me who had it really great and wonderful parents are upset and speaking out, you've really touched on something.
Yes.
Like, that's the truth. Like I have my brother sending me articles about this, like how lame they're using this. And I'm thinking, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But maybe this is why this is happening, because we can all just, first of all, things don't change without conversation, right? And knowledge. And I liked what you posted. Listen to our guests, because when you get to know what the issues are, then you go, oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, just hear what an adoptee has to say and how adoptee feels. Don't pretend to understand that or minimize it with your own thoughts, with your own. Don't project your own stuff when you don't really know.
No. It would be like us trying to do that with something we're not aware of. And the one thing that is kind of, I wouldn't say it's funny in this chapter, but she gets into the whole sperm donor situation.
Yeah.
Because we had friends visit us, and I'm not going to name them, but they actually told us a story this weekend. He was like, I got to talk to you about your podcast, because we have a friend who they found out, I guess he was a sperm donor for years in college in the 1970s and made $50 a pop back then. That was a lot of money. And he did it multiple times.
Yet another thing men can make more money at than women.
We were laughing.
I would have been doing that if I'd had the ability back then.
Right. My friend and I were both like, yeah, that's so, like, men could just always find a way to make some money.
Yeah.
And they had no, he was a young guy, had no like implications of what that meant when he was young. So years later, he's been married for years and years. He has kids. Someone knocks on his door. I'm your daughter, because it not knocks on his door, but he gets an email because of the sperm donor. He's like, oh, and his wife's like, what? You were a sperm donor? So then he finds out he has all these kids, many more, because the laws opened up that they don't have privacy anymore. So he has all these kids. Well, the one daughter he got really close to, it's a long story. They got very close, years and years. Turns out she went on Ancestry. Here's another Ancestry plug. That's not her father. It was the gynecologist doing these things. He was on 2020. He was some famous gynecologist that was like pretending he was taking things.
Oh.
And that's actually involved.
I remember hearing about that.
Yes. And then we got into a whole thing about, wow, this opens up a whole, and then how adoptee, like she talked about in here, if you have a bunch of sperm donors or people from the same town doing this,
you have a big risk of that,
yes,
incest. Big risk
because
of that.
You're in the same age group, you're in the same dating pool, and you'd be attracted to someone else with your qualities.
Yes, like that mirror.
These are things I've never thought about.
I know.
Like, holy cow. And then just to hear this weekend and then to have Nancy talk about it, I was like, oh, this is, so there are people who can relate to our podcast that aren't just adopted. I mean, lots of people out there have this, and even just going through divorce, when people have traumatic divorces or single parents, or there's lots of things that go on. So,
Yeah.
you know, I hope I think we should sum it up. What's the last chapter, Sarah? We were talking about that. The last paragraph. She had like,
it's time that we stop denying painful
Yes.
truths in order to avoid the painful work of making difficult decisions which affect the well-being of our children. Our failure to keep our children safe and secure puts them in a perpetual state of anxiety. Hi, me. It is time to listen to our children and to put their welfare ahead of our own. Adopted children, foster children, stepchildren, biological children. All children deserve nothing less than our very best love and protection.
I like
Amen.
that. Amen. That's the truth for everybody.
Yes.
I love that. I'm glad you read that. I know, the perpetual state of anxiety. You're like, hi.
Hi. If anyone's watching on YouTube, say hi to Woody.
Yeah, we have Woody in the background listening
Woody.
intently because we're fascinating. But
As you'll see, we're not in our closets today.
We're not in our closets. We will be back in our closets. We're having a little time out of our closets today for our backs. So one
more chapter, and then we'll have a wrap up episode, and then we're on to our next book, season 2 after this, and we'll share all about that on our wrap up episode.
Yep, and we're about to introduce our guest, which we can't wait, and a friend of the show. And
especially, we'll be able to share our book if anybody wants to follow along. Mm-hmm. In season 2, this time, since you didn't know us at the beginning of season 1, but you can follow along.
We'll
give you all that info. So,
all right.
Time for our guest.
Time for our guest.
Okay.